All right, everybody. Welcome back to the S&C podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Matthew Score, and we got Stephen Calley all the way down from down under in Australia. We got a great episode today. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we apply ATG principles into team trainings for, as we are both footballers, soccer players, how we would apply that into a team setting there in warm-ups, during the training, cool-downs, separate lifting sessions, and then touch a little bit on what we think about the actual skills training and how to kind of format team trainings in soccer specific ways. So let's start a little bit off of how have you, Stephen, kind of changed your implementation of, let's start with warm-ups. How have you changed warm-ups, or do you do anything differently with ATG now in your warm-ups when you're working with teams?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been working with the young under 18 team for it's been probably 16 weeks now, and we've been working a lot on just a simple like ATG zero program. So real simple basic stuff. We obviously don't have access to the equipment and to all that extra. The extra things that we need. So we simply start a warm up with reverse sled, so reverse banded sled, and then forward sleds, where the teammates kind of like in their partners, and they'll just pop their hands on the back of their upper back and literally use them as a sled to push them forward. And it's not like they're just kind of stopping there and making it impossible for them to push, but it's giving them a little bit of feedback. And that's also quite good for the person who is trying to slow them down, because it's teaching them how to absorb, and their knees are still heading out over their toes. We're still getting a lot of engagement when we're doing that slowing down mechanism as well. So we start off with the sled. We'll then move into the TIB stuff, the FHL, the Soleus, or KOT calf raises. And then it's kind of like just working our way up on the chain. And a lot of it is kind of sections. So we'll do the TIB stuff or the front and the back. So posterior and anterior chain with the lower leg. Then we move on up to the upper leg. Then we get into some hip stuff, and then move on up into like lower back and hip flexors, and almost like abdomen stuff too. So it's very simple, very basic. It's not anything that, and this is something that I've learned more recently. I always would try and like break the knowledge bank and reinvent the wheel. And what I noticed is that when I started doing that, it just became way too complicated. It was very hard to kind of manage. But then we wouldn't get the results that we were after either, because there'd be a whole lot of confusion. So since then, and like this is obviously practice as well, me having the ability to do this, it's kind of led me to figuring out that like, hey, simple is better. The old saying, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Like that is the best thing to do, but sometimes it's the hardest thing to do as well. So with the under 18 team, we spend probably 25 to 30 minutes. And we go through that whole warm-up. And then I give them, because they're younger kids, they still have this idea in their head that they need to do like their static stretching, or they need to do their leg swings, or they need to do their jog around the pitch. And it's like, okay, if that settles your mind a little bit more, go ahead and do it. But ultimately, they haven't had any injuries. All they've had is a lot of illness, and then some like contact injuries, and that's pretty much been all of the injuries that they've experienced. There's been no hamstring. Well, when we started, there were hamstring, calf, and one kid was coming back from hip surgery as well. But they've all been playing since. So it's just about the simplicity of it is what is most important, and allowing the kids to have a certain amount of buy-in too, because they're young kids. You want to be able to make it fun for them. You want them to enjoy what they're doing. You want them to know that they're working hard, but it's like you're giving them a little bit of leeway all at the same time.
Yeah, warm-ups are a cool or interesting thing, I guess, because there's kind of the two camps where some people, and it changed for me, where when I was kind of broken down and hurt, it's like, you got to give me like 30 minutes. Like I need 20 minutes just for my ankles to get ready to play. Otherwise, I'm going to look like an elephant running out there, like no bend in my ankles. But then I knew kids that were balling out in the college level, and they were like, I've never warmed up in my life. Like I don't do it. Like this is all a waste of time. And I think there is something to be said for that. Like some people need longer to warm up, and usually that's when you're more fragile. And I think, and as I went from fragile to being in much better shape and being able to play, I don't need nearly as much warm up. Some days, or a lot of times, I can just put my boots on and I can just go run and play and sprint. So I think as you become stronger and you kind of develop the right muscle length and strength in the right areas, you need less warm up, but you still, like you said, have to keep in mind the idea of people think this is what helps them. Like if they have static stretching set in your mind, like I need to do this before I warm up, or you're going to be thinking about your hamstring all day, like, let them do the static stretching. It's not going to, it might, maybe it'll hinder their performance a tiny bit, but I think that's going to be drastically offset by the actual mental, like, all right, I did my hamstring stretch. I'm ready to play. I don't know if you've had any similar experiences like this. They actually need less warm up now. Have you kind of
Yeah.
experienced that a little bit?
I've definitely noticed a change in the viewpoint of like what we're doing in terms of the ATG stuff, and less kids have actually been, doing the leg swings afterwards, doing the groins or the adductor stretches afterwards. And coming back, I actually, like on my walk this morning, I listened to, I think it was episode 5 of our podcast. I enjoy listening back because it's always good to kind of get the feedback and like, oh, we did speak about this in this podcast. So I actively do that. We were talking about the bands, and we've had the conversation, so we're not going to go back into it, but also the players that would do the band stuff. And this is just using bands as the idea or as the example, more so, where the players would use the band work and it'd be like, it would be detrimental to their performance because it would take away from their time of that enjoyment. It felt like it was now a chore that they had to do. And it didn't, for them, it didn't weigh up. It was like, I'm doing all of this, and that return on investment was nil basically. But
yeah,
having a look on the, on the forefront of what I'm doing with the under 18s, I've definitely seen a big shift in perception in terms of like having to do more afterwards. They're pretty much being able to jump more into training and get going. And I guess from my perspective as well, I was exactly the same to you. Like I had to do a lot of that sort of stuff, especially, after my ACL reconstructions. Throughout that time, in between the second and the third one, there was a lot of like, do this, and then I did the same warm up every single time. It was like it was probably a 10-minute warm up, just kind of by myself before training, and then I get into it. And after my third one, I was doing a lot to stay ahead of the game, but then it kind of got to a point where I'm like, man, this sucks. I'm done here. I'm drained. All I want to do is just get out and have a kick. That's all I want to do. I don't want to do anything else. And I actually felt better. I felt so much better. I felt more in control of my body for whatever reason. Maybe it's because I just had that trust in it. It was more of a mental thing. And then when I actually dislocated my tibia, like it wasn't from not being strong enough. It was because someone's knee collided in with my knee and it just popped my leg out and then popped back in again. And I still believe that had I not been in that scenario situation, I would probably still be playing, although I wouldn't be here having this chat right now with you. So it's like I've had those experiences myself, and I think experiences count for a lot more than like what you're watching or what you're studying. Like actually doing it and understanding it and going through it. It might not make sense to you, or it might not make sense to whoever's listening, or it might not make sense to the under 18 team that I'm coaching. But I genuinely know the benefit of what it is that you're doing. And I know that it's only a matter of time before you start to move away from your old habits, because that's all that they are.
Yeah. So here's something interesting about the bands, actually. I was listening to Cal Dietz. He's the strength coach up in Minnesota. He's really good. Triphasic is his kind of creation. He was talking about, and this is more from the ankle, because I still try to bring as much information about the ankle as possible. But we talked about the big toe tie-in with the glutes, and the glute firing pattern is something that a lot of people have trouble with. A lot of people will go hamstring first, then glute, or hamstring, then low back, and then glute will work when it should be glute, hamstring, low back. So then a lot of people, to kind of fix that, is the band work. They're like, all right, we'll get the pre-activation with the bands, we'll do the bands. But that's actually super detrimental because you tire out the glutes before you do the actual work. So your glutes are more tired than your hamstrings and your low back. So you're not going to expect it to fire anymore. Like it's already fatigued, and it's already a muscle that wants to work less because you have that wrong reflexive kind of pattern. So you have a bad firing pattern still, and your glutes work less. So that's that's bad. But yeah, so I just wanted to add that in because I thought that was really cool when he said that. And the other thing, you just said a whole bunch of things that I'm kind of connecting things. So I was listening to the Huberman Ido Portal podcast, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't exactly remember what it was called, but Andrew Huberman brought up this topic of, it was like consilience. It was a word like that. I'm going to sound really stupid right now, but basically it was the marriage of like the academic scientific knowledge, double-blind placebo trials, meta-analysis, and experience, and N of one cases and case studies, that they're both important, but you don't want to have one without the other. And he kind of referenced, man, there was one patient, and I don't think his name ever came out, and he was missing the hippocampus or the frontal lobe in his brain or something, and that taught science more about memory and what different sections of the brain did than thousands of studies. That's not to say the studies are bad and the studies aren't really helpful in other areas, but sometimes extreme cases are the most telling of different stories. So if you want to learn about knee health, maybe rather than doing a study on 1,000 average people, maybe you look at how someone with the worst knees in the world, which you could probably make an argument for Ben Patrick 10 years ago, how he turned from the world's worst knees to now you can make the argument for the world's best knees. So that's not to disregard any studies on whatever VMO activation, patellar tendonitis rehab. Keep those in mind, but maybe we should study what created the largest transformation that you can find, or why someone has the world's worst knees, why somebody has the knees that are impossible to break. And that idea to me was just amazing. And then another thing with Charles Poliquin today. He was talking about cluster training. He said there was a paper that came out in 2008. It was titled something like Cluster Training and an Innovative Approach to Strength Training. And clusters training is like you wait 10 seconds in between each single rep. It's a way to gain strength really fast. But he's like, I learned that in 1978. And the article that he read it from came out in 1974. And he reached out to the writer of the article, who learned about it in, I believe it was 1945 or something, 1948 maybe. Wow. 1948 sounds right. So if he would have waited for the scientific studies to come out on cluster training, he would have waited 30 years from when he first heard it. That's not to say that the study isn't good. Like, it's good that you have the scientific method and you went through all the variables, but he would have missed 7 Olympic cycles, 7.5. Yeah. It's like the blending of those two things is so important.
I guess we get caught in the trap though, don't we? Because it's, on one side of things, people want data. They want like a lot of that aspect of, like you were talking about, the meta-analysis and the studies that have been done, and but then on the other end, it's like, why not talk to someone or have someone who has been through that give you their feedback? And especially someone like Ben, especially someone like myself, like yourself too. We've been through all of that sort of stuff, and you have a lot of, I guess it's a lot of clashing, because this is saying one thing, but this person has completely gone against what that says, and it's completely different, and their outcome is different. And it's not to completely disregard that and completely believe that, or completely disregard that one outlier and actually just focus solely on that data. You got to be able to have perspective. Like, you can't just go and be like, no, I just believe that and that's it, like, and nothing else. That person's an outlier. Don't worry about them. But then you have a look at like George Hackenschmidt. The dude was how old? 74 years old, and he was jumping
Mm-hmm.
half. How high was he jumping? Half his height? More than half his height?
He was jumping over chairs, so that's
Yeah.
however tall the chair is.
Like, and that's the thing. I know he's just a genetic freak, and he's an outlier, and that doesn't exist in everyone. Why not? What's the reason behind? And this is probably where we can tie it, like, right back into that team aspect. I was talking to another coach, and actually it was another player who I train of the opposition team, and we're talking about some injuries that their senior teams experienced. They've had that many hamstring issues and injuries this year. It's beyond a joke. It's looking like one every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. He was just going through the players that had torn their hamstrings, strained their hamstrings, other issues in terms of that posterior chain, which we spoke about in that episode 5. We spoke about how, you were talking about lower leg, posterior chain, and squat was like your 3 things. And it's like, well, there's one big component that's lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that lower leg, like you want to, and I was listening to Keegan's podcast as well on the Keegan Smith Rate, ATG mentor, and he was talking about lower leg strength relative to like quads and hamstring and upper leg strength, and how it's significantly more important. You have a look at basketball players, for example, the definition, the strength, the veins that are just popping out of their legs, and the strength that they have to be able to jump and dunk, and obviously the explosiveness too. It's like we neglect, and I know this because I've been there. I neglected my lower legs big time, starting from my feet and my toes all the way up to my shins and my soleus and my gastrocs. Like, I was always solely focused because that's the message that was driven into me. Quads and hamstrings, quads and hamstrings, quads and hamstrings, glutes, 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 glutes. Like, make sure that you have that strength there. And it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense because it's all around that midpoint. You want to be strong in that midpoint. But then you go ahead and you say, like, well, there's a direct correlation between the big toe and your glute. And it's like, well, there's so much in between. And you're missing out on so much. You've got like the toes and the feet, and then the tibs and the gastrocs and your soleus, like, and then you've got everything else, like your abductors with your glutes and that. Like, it's not just one thing. There's so much, which is why when I go and do the sessions with the under 18 team, it's not just hamstrings, quads. Like, we get that blood flow starting off with the ROKP and the forward sleds. That's a good start because we're getting a lot of that. We're getting flexion in the toes, working out gastrocs, our tibs, working out, it's a massive workout for the lower body. And then you can go and isolate and target front and back as we move on up the chain. It makes total sense to me now, but I guess you don't know what you don't know. Hey.
Yeah. So here's some funny. So, you've got your team with next to no soft tissue injuries, contact injuries bound to happen. And then you have another team's first team with hamstring injury every 2 weeks. And maybe in 15, 20, 30 years, you'll be studying and be like, oh, this is why Steph's under 18 team was bulletproof, playing every game, no injuries. So it's in the same lecture, Charles Poliquin says something along the lines of researchers in sports performance are at best sports historians.
They're just cycling through history.
Yeah, it's like they're always like 15 or 20 years behind, and it's like, oh yeah, that is right. It's like, nice. Well, we went through 5 Olympic cycles since then, so it's you have to be bold to take the unresearched ideas and put them into practice. But if you are, and that's what you're doing, is obviously it's paying off. I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of it's smarter to follow what the best in the world are doing versus maybe what the current research is.
It's taking a leap too, because for me, I just jumped into this and I'm still very, very new in my ATG journey. If we are to compare, which I'm not doing because I know that, Ben has done 10, 15, 20 years, and other Ben and Keegan and yourself as well, you are so much more involved. But I think it's important to take the step, and you obviously have people who trust you. Like the under 18s coach, I just approach him and say, hey, Dave, like, I want to do this stuff. It's going to just cost you 30 minutes of your time. That's it. Like, what do you say? He's like, yeah, man, it's going to help you out for sure. And it's about forming those relationships and that as well. And I know that there's been some things that I definitely, like I said in the beginning, I definitely can do better and could have done better and am doing better now. But I didn't necessarily know that. So it's kind of, it is my fault, but it's not my fault in the same respect. But we also want to be able to, like, you form these relationships now with particular people, you know. So for example, my relationship with the coach is really, really well. And we went on and I say we because I was a part of that whole thing. We went on a 12-game unbeaten streak. And then it got to a phase where they had 4 games in less than 2 weeks. And out of those 4 games, they lost 1 game. And then they've lost another one recently, but they've had like sickness and then other like the contact injuries, and potentially having so much in that one frame of time. Like, there is bound to be some overuse that's been occurring as well, some fatigue. So that was also a part to play too. And because I've only been working with them half an hour a week, it's like you can't get the maximum benefits that you would otherwise get if you were doing it in a preseason, for example, because you will be solely focusing on that aspect of strength, not the skill development so much. Because the skill development is what I think football is important. Like, that's the importance of having or playing football, is to get that skill development, to perform better. But ultimately, like, you're missing that whole other side of it in that strength gains aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it's like how much work can you squeeze out of 30 minutes a week in a team setting without a ton of equipment? I mean, like, you're just not going to be able to get the perfect training session. You could get, maybe you can get 80% of the benefit. Like, 80% is perfect. Like, it's 80% isn't perfect, but 80% in that situation is awesome. And I mean, 80% is going to reap the majority of the benefits. Now, if you wanted to turn somebody into Usain Bolt, and then you would really need to dive in, have the right equipment, have all of the time, the diet right, sleep right, everything. But that's not you're not trying to create Usain Bolt. You just want to stop having injuries. And the other thing with that is tendons take so long to grow that you're not going to be able to just all of a sudden turn everybody's ACLs into steel. Like, it's going to take months and months and years to get them to the point where they're really, really strong. So it's being able to do, what you've done in however many weeks or months, very, very impressive. And it's an excellent, an amazing opportunity for all of the, I guess they're not kids at under 18, but players involved.
Well, that's the thing though, man. Like, they are kids, because here in Australia, there's probably 2 or 3 players at max that are 17 going on 18. The rest of them are 15, some are 16, but most of them are in that younger age bracket. And it's something that, especially at that age, and I don't know whether it happened before. Like, I never experienced a kid that was 16 years old that had already had 3 surgeries, 2 knee surgeries and a hip operation. And like, it's not that I'm bashing surgeons or anything like that, because they play a part, and there are particular instances where like that sort of stuff is needed. But it's just like, well, why?
Yeah.
Why is that happening, and why is no one doing anything about it at the moment? And hence the reason why I'm just like, you know what, it's not only an opportunity, but like for me to be able to spread the word of ATG, but it's an opportunity for me to help kids, because they are kids, not go through what we had to go through. I wanted to just be able to play. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want anything else. And I could hardly do it because I spent most of the time on the sideline. I spent most of the time crying in the shower. I spent most of the time doing my rehab. Like, that is the sort of stuff that happens. You can only go through that if you've had the experience. No book, no study, no research, no nothing, no meta-analysis is going to be able to teach you that. And it's like, well, that's a bit of like a catch-22, because you don't want to experience it, because then you have to go through all that. But then if you don't experience it, you don't understand all that. So you take all that for granted. And that's probably what I need to do better, is actually articulate it and explain it to people that this sucks. All right. I was in a very strong position, and I'm not saying that it wasn't hard, because it was. It was very, very challenging. And again, you don't know what you don't know. For me, I didn't know a lot, especially when I started. And then you've got kids that, it infuriates me, because they're like you said, you can just go out there and put your boots on and start running around and taking free kicks, 2 minutes after you put your boots on. Whereas for me, it was just like, it pained me seeing that, because I'm like, it's frustrating, because they can do it. Whereas for me, it's like, I got to do a 10-minute warm up that includes every single little intricate muscle in my feet and toes and calves and knees and hips and ankles and everything. And they're already out there having a kick. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating because they can do that, because they have the strength. And I guess they take that strength for granted sometimes, because they don't know. Like, they don't understand the potential that they've got, but then also the potential that they can get to as well. Like, there's so much untapped potential. That's my own demons I got to deal with. But
yeah, it's so different playing when your body's at 99, 100% than what it is when you're playing at 85%. Like, it's so different. And after playing at 85 and below probably for, I don't know, 6 years or something like that, ridiculous, I could and occasionally beat up like 90, 95, almost 100% sporadically. I started to be able to pick out when players were in pain. Like, I was probably still on the sidelines while I was watching because I was hurt. But I could watch, I was like, oh, he's still got his foot and ankle problem. His knee is bothering him. He's not ready yet. Like, I could see it. And I don't think almost anybody else could see it, because not a lot of people have spent so much time like, oh, I can't make this cut like that. It's not something that you want to be able to develop like that, but I could just see it. And it's so, people don't understand. It's like, you really aren't. It's like, I'm not playing well. It's like, well, knee isn't quite back yet. Like, you sprained your ankle, and your ankle tendons are pretty much back, but your feet don't work. Like, it's just having that kind of, it can derail careers at some points, because you get into that circle. It's like, oh, I'm not playing well. You kind of get down to the dumps, and you don't finish your rehab, and you aren't getting the right rehab, and then it's like you start playing even worse. It's like, duh, and you just keep going around in that circle. It's, if you can prevent that and create that kind of upwards, like, oh, I feel really good, I'm playing better, and I feel really good, and I keep playing better, and I get more confident. That's two totally different compounding trajectories.
yeah, absolutely. That's that positive compound effect. It's what I've been doing with Uncom, with the juggling. It's 5 a day, or the handstanding, or the splits, or all the other stuff that's within it. It's like, it's 5 minutes a day, and you can see the difference from start to finish. And going back to that, the comments that you were just making about being able to see other players, there's one player that I know that for 3 years has been on that roundabout. It's like, you can see it, and initially you're like, oh, he's got it. Like, maybe the first year, it's like, oh, he's got it. He's back. He can definitely do what's, he's all good. And then all of a sudden it's like, nah, back to the start again. Okay. Oh, that must have been just a freak accident, all right, cool. And then it happens again. And it's like, there's a consistency that's going on here. And it's like, you're still doing the same thing. You're expecting different results, not happening. You're doing the same thing, expecting different results, not happening. And for him, he's been on the merry-go-round for 3 years, and credit to him, he's still stuck it out and still stayed there. But he hasn't played a game of first team in 2 years. Like, he'd come back and play first team or reserves, and then first team, and then would get injured, and then the same thing happened again. And it's like a little tweak in the adductor. It's a little tweak in the hamstring. It's a little tweak in the calf. And it's like 2 to 3 weeks here. Spend 2 to 3 weeks to come back. Get into it again. Get injured. 2 to 3 weeks again. And like, in hindsight, I am glad that I ruptured my ACLs, because it's like, it's just that. It's an ACL, cool. Whereas all this other stuff that's going on, I know what it's doing to him mentally. because it's like, I've got this blockage in my head and in my brain that like my calf's going to go, my adductor's going to go, my hip flexor's going to go, my hamstring's going to go. Like you've got all these scenarios that could potentially happening. So you're walking around like the Tin Man from what's it called, the Yellow Brick Roads, Wizard of Oz. It's stiff as a board, and you're expecting to get something different out of it from doing the exact same thing. So like there's a reason why this stuff's happening. Pilates might work for some people. It ain't going to work for you, man. So stop doing it. High intensity interval training, it might work for some people. It's clearly not working for you, so stop doing it. Static stretching, it might work for some people, but it's clearly not working for you, so stop doing it. Like what's the saying? Shame on fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It's like fool me 700 times, and you're still saying it's someone else's fault. I'm not saying that he's saying that, but that's the way that it looks, because it's just you're stuck on this constant cycle. Break the cycle, like make a decision. And that's probably another half an hour conversation about mental fragility within the footballing world or with the sporting world and injuries, because it's another game. It's just a game, but it is a hard game to play.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I put out couple of days ago, there's the 3 parts I put out on social media of like the 10 coaches that taught me what I know.
That was top notch.
And now, I mean, I think about it now, and it's like now I know everything I know mainly because of them. There were a couple other books, whatever, that taught me a little bit, but even if I would have known who all of those people were when I was 15, I don't think I would have been able to parse through that huge volume of information. It's taken. I mean, I first heard about any of those coaches maybe 7 years ago. 1 or 2 of them 7 years ago, and then 4 or 5 of them in the last year and a half. I mean, Knees Over Toes guy, ATG mentor, Ben Clavier weren't them 5 years ago. They weren't online like that. It takes a long time to parse through all that information. That's why if you are someone who's built a glass like I naturally am, you need somebody to come in and provide you with that information in kind of a palatable sense. Like I knew who Cal Dietz was maybe 4 years ago, but I'm starting to get into his spring ankle work, like just in the last couple months, and it's been amazing for my ankles. Like it's what really got over the hump. And why didn't I do the spring ankle work for 3.5 years? Like it's because I didn't understand that, and it's like why didn't I understand correctly all the west side barbell stuff? Why didn't I understand what Louis Simmons was saying? I think that's the real value in a coach. And you talked about having the experience of tearing your ACL 3 times and being able to kind of explain that and the importance. It's like, yeah, that is important. It's super important for a coach. I don't want every player to have to go through that. And having a coach that has seen so many things, been through so much, and is able to articulate it, I think it's the real benefit and the real reason and why having a coach is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, when you have the ability to be able to look on or look through someone else's eyes or step in someone else's shoes, and that's through perspective, you get a better understanding of where they've been and how you don't want to do what they've done. So listen to them, But look at that. That's 30, almost 35 minutes, man. Far out. We got to keep going on this one, I think. But...
we'll have part 2 next week or something.
Yeah, definitely. You got to go to bed though. Isn't it bedtime there yet?
6. It's 6:30, man. Come on.
I'm kidding. Where can they find you, Matty?
Hey, Score Performance, SKAAR Performance on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, anywhere that's fun. You can look at my stuff. What about yourself?
Yeah, I am Coach Carly with the 3 I's on Instagram and TikTok, and the new YouTube channel, the S&C podcast, is up and running. Spotify is next. We are climbing. If you like what we're talking about and you enjoy listening to what we offer, please follow, subscribe, share, whatever you can do to help us grow. That would be fantastic, and we would really appreciate it. We're going to be getting some people on board the next. Well, we're going to actually have a chat about this afterwards, off air, but we've got some exciting things coming up, and we'd really love to be able to share what we're doing, but we're just going to keep it under wraps for now. So keep the suspense waiting.
Leave the cliffhanger. All right, everybody. Yeah. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.